King Charles had faced political storms, family betrayals, and fears about the monarchy's survival, but nothing prepared him for the document placed before him. As he turned the final page, his expression hardened, and his hand stopped moving. The investigation had uncovered a secret plan linked directly to Camilla, a calculated effort to prevent Princess Charlotte from receiving royal titles in the future. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles lowered his eyes to the marked page as disbelief turned colder. Palace officials had opened the investigation after unexplained changes appeared inside succession and honors planning files. These records mapped titles, patronages, and constitutional roles, the public duties and responsibilities assigned to family members. Investigators had not found a clerical error. They had found intent. Charlotte's name had repeatedly been pushed away from positions that might allow her to build an independent royal identity. The king reached the page carrying Camilla's name and placed the file on the desk. He said nothing. The conclusion was plain. The queen consort had secretly supported a plan to block Charlotte from receiving future honors, including consideration for Princess Royal. That title, traditionally granted by a monarch to an eldest daughter, does not pass automatically. It remains within the sovereign's personal gift, so private influence could shape history without Charlotte knowing. Handwritten instructions deepened the betrayal. Meeting notes linked restrictive language to discussions arranged through Camilla's office, while revised drafts described Charlotte's future role as limited and dependent. A documented account from the investigating secretary confirmed that these changes had circulated through trusted channels. Charles read the sentence twice. This was not a disagreement over ceremony. It involved his granddaughter, William's daughter, and the monarchy's future. William received the findings through a sealed briefing and felt anger rise before he reached the second page. He learned that Charlotte's future had been discussed without his knowledge or Catherine's consent. The prince closed the folder, then opened it again, forcing himself to read every line. His daughter had not been removed from succession, but someone had tried to narrow what she might become. Camilla received a brief message requesting her immediate presence before the king. She remained seated, holding the paper as the meaning settled. Charles now faced a choice that could destroy the peace around the throne: protect his marriage, defend Charlotte, or expose a palace operation capable of splitting the family permanently. But before he confronted the woman beside him, he had to understand exactly who stood to lose, and why Charlotte had become the silent center of a battle she never knew existed. Princess Charlotte had never asked to become a symbol of royal power. To her family, she was a daughter, a sister, and a young girl carrying expectations far beyond her years. Yet inside guarded palace offices, her future had become a contested prize. While she continued her ordinary routine, 4 adults understood that one hidden decision could shape how history remembered her forever. Charlotte stood third in the line of succession, the official order determining who could one day inherit the throne. Her position mattered for more than rank. She belonged to the first modern royal generation, in which a younger brother could not automatically push an elder sister aside. That change gave her future enormous symbolic weight, because the way the palace treated her would reveal whether its promises of equality were real or merely ceremonial. Catherine sensed the tension reaching her daughter before anyone spoke openly. She sat beside Charlotte after noticing the young princess watching the adults more carefully than usual. The Princess of Wales offered a gentle reassurance, telling her that nothing inside the family had changed. She concealed the investigation, but the effort hurt. Catherine and William had spent years protecting their children from the pressure of royal life, preparing them slowly for duty, without allowing the crown to consume their childhood. William carried the anger differently. He read the documents in private, and found Charlotte's future buried beneath harmless administrative language. The phrases appeared routine, but their purpose was clear: limit her independent patronages, reduce her ceremonial authority, and prevent her from receiving a household or public role strong enough to stand on its own. The prince closed the folder, looked directly at Catherine, and said their daughter would not be used as a bargaining piece. Then he opened it again, determined to understand every person behind the plan. Charles felt the conflict tearing in two directions. He loved his granddaughter, yet confronting Camilla threatened the partnership that had supported him through grief, scandal, and the strain of becoming sovereign. The king knew silence would protect his marriage for a moment, but it could permanently damage his bond with William. That mattered, because the monarchy depended on cooperation between the reigning monarch and the future king. A private betrayal between them could become an institutional fracture. Camilla's fear ran deeper than simple hostility. She believed Charlotte's future popularity could weaken the status and ceremonial legacy of her own family branch. The queen consort could not remove the child from succession, but honors, patronages, official residences, and ceremonial roles could be quietly restricted. Those positions mattered because they gave a royal figure public identity, influence, and lasting relevance beyond proximity to the throne. Anne felt the discovery strike personally. The title of Princess Royal, an honor held for life by the sovereign's eldest daughter, belonged to her and could not pass while she lived. Still, any secret effort to block Charlotte from future consideration touched both history and family. The Princess Royal remembered a private exchange with Camilla after a ceremony years earlier. At the time, the words had sounded cautious. Now they sounded like a warning. The investigation had exposed the plan, but its true beginning lay years earlier, during one carefully staged royal ceremony, where a single private conversation changed everything. Every royal crisis has a moment that appears insignificant until the truth gives it new meaning. For this family, that moment came after a major palace ceremony. When the music had ended, the guests had departed, and the public smiles were no longer required. Behind a closed door, Camilla asked one question about Charlotte's future. The answer she received became the trigger for everything that followed. Palace planners had already begun mapping the future responsibilities of George, Charlotte, and Louis as the monarchy prepared for generational change. These plans covered military affiliations, national patronages, and ceremonial duties, the official roles through which senior royals represent the crown. Charlotte stood out because aides believed she could one day carry major responsibilities of her own. Some even considered her a natural future candidate for Princess Royal once the title became available. Camilla raised the subject after the first Trooping the Color ceremony of Charles's reign. The event is the monarch's official birthday parade, but the private conversation that followed carried far greater consequences. With no aides present, the queen consort asked Anne whether Charlotte should ever inherit the title she held. The Princess Royal answered without hesitation. Tradition placed the honor within the sovereign's gift, she said, but service, not palace politics, should decide whether the young princess deserved it. Camilla placed her glass on the table. Her expression tightened, and she replied that tradition could be managed before it becomes expectation. Anne remembered the sentence because it sounded colder than caution. She watched the queen leave the room and felt the first stir of unease, though no accusation yet existed. At that moment, the exchange seemed private, uncomfortable, and finished. It was none of those things. Within weeks, planning documents began describing Charlotte's future duties as supporting and non-independent. The wording mattered because it would limit her authority, prevent her from building a separate public identity, and keep her dependent on George's future household. Anne later found the same phrase inside 3 different files. The repetition was too exact to be accidental, and each document had passed through channels connected to Camilla's office. Public affection made the fear sharper. Camilla had watched Catherine and Charlotte draw warmth from crowds together, creating an image of continuity she could not control. The queen consort feared that the mother and daughter might one day become a powerful royal force beyond her influence. Charlotte's popularity was still innocent, but inside the palace, it had begun to look like future power. A former private secretary finally preserved the proof. In a documented account given to investigators, he produced an annotated draft linking the restrictive wording to a meeting requested through Camilla's office. Anne took the paper, placed it before the investigator, and said the palace was no longer dealing with speculation. It was dealing with intent. Charles read the account and understood the plan had not begun with one careless remark. It had grown through meetings, revisions, and carefully planted language. With the origin exposed and the evidence secured, the king could delay no longer. The next door he opened would place him face to face with Camilla and force the marriage into its most dangerous confrontation. There were no cameras, no advisors, and no carefully prepared statements when Charles confronted Camilla. Only the king, the queen, and the investigation file resting between them. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then he pushed the document across the table and asked the question carrying the full weight of their marriage. Why had she tried to decide his granddaughter's future without telling him? Charles had dismissed every aide before the door closed. No private secretary could soften the exchange, and no court official could translate anger into diplomatic language. The file contained meeting records, handwritten annotations, and instructions connected to Camilla's household. A royal household is the team of staff and advisors serving a senior family member, and those offices can quietly shape decisions long before the public sees them. The king tapped one marked page and asked her to explain every line. Camilla refused to call the plan an attack. She said the monarchy could not survive if too many family members built separate centers of influence. The queen consort argued that titles, patronages, and independent offices had to remain concentrated around George's eventual reign. Charlotte could remain visible, she insisted, but she should never become powerful enough to create a competing royal identity. Charles's restraint finally broke. He told her Charlotte was his granddaughter, not a rival court waiting to be contained. The king's anger mattered, because the argument had moved beyond family jealousy. It now threatened the trust between the reigning sovereign and William, the man expected to inherit the crown. If that bond collapsed, the monarchy's future leadership could fracture before the next reign even began. Camilla pushed her chair backward. She accused William and Catherine of building a future monarchy in which she would be remembered only as an uncomfortable transition. The Queen's voice rose as she described the affection surrounding the Princess of Wales and her daughter, a bond she believed could erase everything she had fought to secure. Charles challenged her without looking away. Was this truly about efficiency, or had resentment guided every instruction? Camilla held her silence, then finally admitted the fear beneath the plan. She believed Charlotte could one day inherit the respect, warmth, and symbolic power that had taken her decades to approach. The confession did not excuse the scheme. It exposed it. William waited in another room as the voices carried through the closed door. The prince rose once, ready to enter, then forced himself back into his chair. He knew this confrontation belonged to his father, but every raised word concerned his daughter. Charles reached across the table and removed the pen lying beside Camilla's hand. He declared that no further instruction involving his grandchildren would leave her office. She stared at him, understanding that the order stripped away more than influence. It stripped away trust. The confrontation settled the truth, but it created a harder question. Did Charles possess the authority and the emotional courage to reverse everything Camilla had already set in motion? The marriage had cracked under the truth, yet anger alone could not protect Charlotte. The real battle would now move into the machinery of royal power, where signatures mattered more than promises. Royal power rarely announces itself with raised voices. It moves through sealed papers, private audiences, constitutional advice, and decisions made long before the public hears a word. Camilla's plan had survived because it hid inside that machinery. Reversing it required more than Charles's anger. The king now had to prove that the crown still answered to the sovereign, not to fear, rivalry, or influence operating beside the throne. Charles met Anne and William at a private table, where every altered document had been placed in chronological order. The Princess Royal title does not pass automatically from one woman to another. It can only be granted by the reigning sovereign after the previous holder's lifetime. That distinction mattered, because no one could promise Charlotte the honor now, but someone could still try to poison her future consideration years before the decision was due. Anne watched her brother study the papers without touching them. She understood that patronages, military appointments, residences, and ceremonial roles could be shaped long in advance through palace planning. These positions gave senior royals public identity, staff, influence, and authority. Informal suggestions written today could become accepted policy tomorrow. The Princess Royal spoke calmly, telling Charles that protecting Charlotte did not mean guaranteeing her a title. It meant preserving her right to be judged fairly. William showed no such restraint. He demanded the removal of every official who had concealed, approved, or advanced the restrictions. The prince argued that leaving even one participant in place would tell palace staff that loyalty mattered more than truth. His anger carried another danger. If he lost faith in his father's household, the future king could begin separating his own operation from the reigning monarch's long before succession. Charles hesitated. A sweeping purge could expose the scandal, frighten senior staff, and damage confidence in the royal household, the network responsible for managing official duties and supporting the sovereign. Yet silence carried a greater cost. Protecting the institution by hiding wrongdoing would turn Camilla's private plan into the crown's shared failure. The investigation then produced its hardest evidence. One memorandum recommended that Charlotte should never hold an independent household or major ceremonial office, even as an adult. A senior aide had drafted it after a meeting connected to Camilla's office, and later stated in a recorded interview that he believed he was acting with her personal approval and protection. Charles took a red pen. He drew a hard line through the recommendation, then wrote that no future sovereign would be bound by it. The king's hand remained steady, but the words marked a direct rejection of the woman beside his throne. Anne quietly pushed a second page toward him. It listed every official who had participated. She did not need to speak again. Her brother understood that authority without consequences was only theater. William watched as Charles signed the restructuring order. Access would be revoked, files reassigned, and Camilla's office removed from future decisions involving the Wales children. The monarch had finally chosen authority over avoidance. But royal orders never remain private forever, and as doors closed around the Queen's household, the first shockwaves began tearing through the palace. By sunset, the palace no longer felt like a home. Offices were sealed, access privileges were suspended, and trusted staff members entered private rooms only to emerge pale and silent. The king's order had begun. Camilla's plan was being dismantled piece by piece, but every document removed from her control carried another consequence. The investigation was no longer threatening the family from outside. It was breaking it from within. Charles's restructuring moved quickly. Selected members of Camilla's household lost access to succession planning, future honors discussions, and files involving William's children. Succession planning is the palace process used to prepare future royal roles and responsibilities, which meant these restrictions cut her office away from decisions that could shape the next generation. One senior aide was dismissed after admitting in a recorded interview that he had transmitted the restrictive recommendations while believing he acted under the Queen Consort's authority. Camilla returned to her private rooms and stopped at the doorway. 2 document boxes were gone. Her official briefing folder had vanished with them. The Queen crossed to the desk, placed one hand against the empty surface, and understood what the removals truly meant. Charles had not merely rejected her plan. He had withdrawn his trust, and within royal life, lost access often carried more humiliation than any public rebuke. William felt relief, but it came poisoned by consequence. Charlotte was safer, yet the prince knew his father's marriage might never recover. Catherine answered his anger with quiet sadness. The Princess of Wales told him their daughter must never learn that adults had fought over her future as though it were property. Her words mattered, because protecting Charlotte required more than canceling papers. It required preserving the child's faith in the family expected to guide her. Palace staff began choosing sides. Some defended Camilla's concern that too many independent royal offices could weaken the crown, while others called the scheme a personal betrayal disguised as strategy. The division spread through corridors and private conversations, turning professional loyalty into suspicion. Charles ate alone after canceling a scheduled dinner with Camilla. The king reached for a joint photograph on his desk and studied it longer than he intended. He did not destroy it. Instead, he placed it inside a drawer and closed it slowly, as though hiding the image could quiet what had happened. One final document made the silence worse. Investigators uncovered a personal note suggesting Camilla had planned to persuade Charles himself to formalize the restrictions. The Queen had not only shaped policy behind him, she had intended to make him sign away Charlotte's possibilities without revealing the true design. Anne met William privately and delivered the warning without softness. The Princess Royal said the crisis could not be solved by destroying Camilla. It could only be solved by forcing the family to decide what Charlotte's future should mean. The fallout had punished those responsible, yet punishment could not rebuild the family. That would require a private meeting without advisors, titles, or the protection of palace walls. The turning point did not come through another decree. It came in a quiet room where Charles and William sat without secretaries, investigators, or constitutional papers between them. For once, they spoke not as sovereign and heir, but as father and son. The anger remained, but beneath it lay a deeper fear, that Charlotte's childhood had nearly been shaped by ambitions she could not understand, and choices she never made. Charles closed the door himself. No advisor would witness the exchange, and no private secretary would shape the words that followed. William began carefully, admitting that his fury had never been about securing a title for Charlotte. The prince was angry because someone had tried to erase her choices before she was old enough to understand them. That mattered, because the young princess's future service should be shaped by duty and character, not by an adult's insecurity hidden inside palace paperwork. William leaned forward and said the damage reached beyond one child. If secret influence could narrow Charlotte's path, it could also affect George and Louis whenever their futures became politically inconvenient. The future king needed to know that the crown would protect all three children equally, because trust between generations was not simply personal. It was the foundation on which the next reign would eventually rest. Charles did not defend himself. The king admitted that he had failed to notice how power was moving through the palace structure around him. He had trusted familiar voices, accepted routine briefings, and mistaken silence for stability. That failure had allowed Camilla's fear to become official language before he understood what was happening. The monarch slowly removed his signet ring and placed it on the table. A signet ring carries the sovereign's personal symbol and represents royal authority. But in that moment, he pushed authority aside. Charles spoke as Charlotte's grandfather. He promised that no secret instruction issued during his reign would bind her future, diminish her role, or punish her for the affection people might one day show her. William's anger softened, though it did not disappear. The prince accepted the promise, but warned that trust could not be rebuilt by a single conversation. Charles agreed. He revealed through a written draft placed between them that he would issue an internal directive preserving equal consideration for George, Charlotte, and Louis in all future service planning. Catherine's concern entered the room through William's account of her quiet fear for their daughter. The Princess of Wales wanted protection without turning Charlotte into a symbol of palace conflict. Charles asked to speak with her personally, and apologize for allowing the situation to develop. Camilla would retain her public position, but the queen consort would permanently lose influence over future titles, household planning, and assignments involving the Wales children. Anne later read the directive and approved its language because it protected Charlotte without promising an honor that belonged to a future sovereign. Charles then requested one final family meeting before the restructuring became public. The family had reached its private decision, but the monarchy still faced the judgment of millions, and one public image would soon transform palace secrecy into a national reckoning. The palace had hoped to contain the damage through careful language. That hope ended before sunrise. Across the front page of a national newspaper, one sentence appeared above photographs of Camilla and Charlotte. Queen's secret plan targeted young princess. Within hours, broadcasters abandoned scheduled programming. Crowds gathered near Buckingham Palace, and a private family betrayal became a public test of the monarchy's moral authority. The newspaper placed Camilla in formal regalia beside Charlotte at a family ceremony, separating them with a thick black line. The contrast felt brutal. One image represented established power, the other represented a child whose future had been discussed without her voice. Buckingham Palace, the monarch's official London residence and administrative centre, became the focus of a national argument no statement could easily control. A morning broadcaster framed the scandal as a struggle over whether royal daughters could still be limited by private palace politics. The presenter read from the investigation summary and asked why a young princess's future had been treated as something adults could quietly narrow. Public anger grew because the issue reached beyond affection for Charlotte. It raised a deeper fear that hidden influence could overpower the monarchy's promises of fairness. Crowds gathered outside the palace gates before midday. One young girl stood near the barriers, holding a handwritten sign that read, "Charlotte deserves her own future." The message spread across broadcasts and social media within minutes. It became the image that captured the public mood: simple, emotional, and impossible for the crown to dismiss. Charles watched the live coverage without speaking. The king understood that secrecy was no longer protecting the institution. It was making the crown appear complicit in the plan. His silence now carried danger, because every hour without accountability allowed the public to believe that the palace cared more about shielding Camilla than protecting his granddaughter. Camilla heard hostile commentary from an adjoining room. The queen consort switched off the television, but the silence that followed offered no relief. She sat alone, knowing the public was not debating only her judgment. It was deciding what kind of woman she had become in the story of Charlotte's future. William resisted pressure to release an emotional statement. The prince refused to let his daughter become the public face of a conflict she did not understand. Instead, he supported a formal palace response, confirming that all restrictive recommendations had been cancelled, the relevant offices reorganized, and every future honor left to the appropriate sovereign. Anne added one decisive line during a recorded press exchange. The Princess Royal said service should be earned through duty, never blocked through private fear. Her words carried force because the disputed title remained hers, and because she had witnessed the plan's earliest warning. Catherine later appeared with Charlotte at a previously scheduled engagement. The Princess of Wales remained calm while her daughter carried on, unaware of the full battle around her. That contrast softened public anger and sharpened public sympathy. Charles finally accepted responsibility through an official statement, admitting that failures of oversight had allowed the plan to develop. The response began to shift. The world had delivered its judgment, but the deepest verdict still belonged to the family itself. And the king now had to decide what justice, loyalty, and forgiveness would finally look like. The crisis ended not with Camilla's destruction or Charlotte's elevation, but with a principle the palace could no longer ignore. No child's future should be secretly narrowed to protect an adult's position. In the final family meeting, Charles faced the people he had hurt through inattention. Camilla faced the consequences of fear, and William defended his daughter without demanding a crown, a title, or revenge. Charles entered the room carrying the final directive. William sat beside Catherine, while Anne remained near Camilla, watching every reaction. The king announced that each document designed to limit Charlotte's future had been formally revoked and removed from active palace policy. Active policy means the instructions officials are currently expected to follow, and canceling those papers mattered because hidden recommendations could no longer shape the young princess's life years from now. The monarch placed the directive on the table and signed it before the family. It permanently excluded Camilla's office from decisions involving future titles, patronages, households, and public roles for the Wales children. These royal households are the staff and resources assigned to support senior family members, giving them independence and influence. The restriction meant the Queen would remain beside Charles in public, but her power over the next generation had ended. Camilla accepted the decision without argument. She admitted through a recorded statement prepared for the private meeting that fear had guided her. The Queen consort had imagined herself disappearing from royal history, while Catherine and Charlotte became symbols of the monarchy's future. That insecurity had turned a child's possibilities into something she believed she needed to control. Catherine answered firmly but without cruelty. The Princess of Wales did not offer immediate forgiveness, yet she refused to let Charlotte inherit the hatred created by adults. She said her daughter would be protected from the full bitterness of the dispute, because saving Charlotte's future meant preserving her heart as well as her position. William spoke next. The prince declared that he had never asked for a guaranteed honor for his daughter. He wanted only the secret barrier removed before it could stop her from serving, growing, or choosing her own path. Anne supported him, explaining that the title of Princess Royal remained hers for life, and that any future decision must belong freely to a later sovereign, guided by duty, circumstance, and service. Charles lifted the original restrictive memorandum. He tore it through the center, then again, before placing the pieces inside a secure disposal box. The king had not granted Charlotte power. He had refused to let someone else steal her possibilities. Camilla would remain queen, but the marriage had changed permanently. Trust had been wounded, and her political influence inside the family had been sharply reduced. Charlotte received no promised title, yet every hidden obstacle had been removed. Her future was open again. The monarchy survived because it chose fairness over insecurity, responsibility over silence, and a child's freedom over an adult's fear. The investigation began with a king frozen by betrayal, but it ended with a grandfather moving decisively, and with Charlotte's future belonging, at last, to Charlotte herself. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.